Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be talking about the utter mess that our criminal justice system has become. Boy, have the feminists done a great job in weaponising domestic violence, making false allegations utterly irresistible for any woman who wants to destroy her ex-partner. And who has to do the dirty work to get these guys locked up? It's our police force. I've always been encouraged by the steady stream of police who contact me to complain about being forced to impose these unjust laws. But what's really scary is even retired police officers are too nervous to speak out. They tell me that the powers that be are so dangerous and will stop at nothing to prevent people exposing what's going on. But today we're really lucky. We've got two Queensland police who are brave enough to talk to me about what's happening. We're going to be disguising their voices and some of their identifying details. I'm going to call them Paul and Lisa. Hello, guys.
Hi, Bettina.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm so happy you've decided to do this, and I do think it takes a certain amount of courage in the climate we're in today.
I'm more than happy that there's actually somebody that's willing to support us and get that message out there.
Well, yeah, we've had some wonderful conversations in the last few days, and I want to talk about what you've been telling me about what's happening in our justice system and what the job you guys have to do. I'll start with Paul. Paul, how long have you been in the force?
I've been in the force for more than 15 years.
Yeah. And you wrote to me telling me that you were really, you're really concerned about what was happening. And you saw something that, you've seen a lot of things that really upset you in the way males are treated. Do you want to just briefly tell me something about that?
Yes, certainly. Look, I do acknowledge that there is a problem with domestic violence in society, and we need to deal with it. But it deeply concerns me that it's become a gender-driven issue, that it's pushed on us, that is always males that are perpetrating domestic violence and the males must be sorted out. I find that incredibly disturbing and upsetting, and it's incredibly unjust.
Mm-hmm. Must be upsetting as a male to have to lock up your fellow brothers, I suppose.
To be honest with you, the thing that upsets me the most is, in the end, the consequence that I see that's most destructive is that fathers are often alienated from their children through the use of domestic violence orders. Mm-hmm. The orders become so powerful and have such a strong effect on men and on proceedings through the family law courts that men often find themselves in the position where the courts are saying, well, we're not sure that we should grant you permission to see your children. That's the ultimate injustice of it.
And it must be heartbreaking to watch men come to that realisation that they've been accused. Once they've been accused, as you know, it's all downhill from then on, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, if you wish, I can give you an example of something that happened recently that absolutely sickened me.
Yes, okay.
So I had a situation where a man came to the police station and he'd received a phone call asking him to attend a station and collect paperwork. And he genuinely had no idea why it was that he'd been asked to come to this police station.
Yep.
So as it turned out, his wife had made an application for a domestic violence order. It was a private application. And a temporary domestic violence order was put in place, and he knew nothing about it at all. That was the first time he knew anything about it. And I had to explain the document to him and serve it on him and give him a copy of it. And he was visibly shaken. He had tears in his eyes after I described to him what the order said. And he looked at me and he quietly said, look, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble processing this. I advised him that he desperately needed to seek professional legal advice regarding the matter. And I wanted to take him into a room and privately have a discussion with him and give him some idea of where he stood with it and what he could do about it. And the poor guy, he was struggling not to break down and cry in front of me. He basically fled from the station. I mean, this order had conditions on it which allowed him, he couldn't even go back to his home, even though his office was there and his work equipment. He couldn't have contact with his wife or his children except for a solicitor. He had absolutely no idea this was coming. No one had ever discussed it with him or asked him his side of the story or what was happening.
It must be so tragic to watch that. And you knew where this was heading, and of course it was just beginning to hit him, wasn't it?
Well, he had no idea what was about to come, and unfortunately I had some idea where this was probably going, and this was more than likely a slick move by a solicitor to get a domestic violence order in place to use as a weapon in the family law court and to impact his chances of having ongoing contact with his children. At that point, he was just flabbergasted of the allegations that had been made. I don't think he fully understood what was about to go down when this was going to get used in the family law court.
Just tell me what he was accused of.
So the short answer is that it appears the relationship was not going well and the marriage was coming apart. They'd been married for many years and they had children. And she had advised him that she wanted to end the relationship and end the marriage. She wanted a divorce. And he was rocked and shaken by that. He didn't see it coming. He had no idea this was about to happen. And he lost his cool. And this is the basis of the allegation. And he screamed at her, "I fucking hate you." Excuse the language, but that's what he said. And then he stormed out of the house. So I want to be clear on this. I don't condone his behaviour or say it was good. But in the context of the situation of what was going down, the emotions just overwhelmed him and it got the better of him. And in a momentary, I guess, breakdown in his psychology, he said and did some things he probably normally would never do. But at the end of the day, because of that, this order's been made and he's screwed. I sound like I'm exaggerating, but I know that it is very likely that he will have to fight really, really hard to see his children again.
And still probably not get to.
I mean, this is the chilling realisation that violence orders are really effective means of destroying the relationship between fathers and their children. And, you can understand how devastating this is for men to be told this. I mean, obviously this guy had no idea really what was coming, and I'm pleased you were able to advise him to get a lawyer. But, of course, a lot of people can't afford lawyers, and they get so little support in understanding what's happening to them. Lisa, do you want to make a comment about all of this?
I really would. It kind of disgusts and discourages me in relation to our so-called justice system, simply because this man, he was guilty until proven innocent. And I'm sorry, but I always thought that in our country, it was the other way around. You are innocent until proven guilty. And with the extreme amount of impact that this can have on people's lives, I don't understand why it's being used so flippantly, why people are being allowed to use it as a weapon against their partners. Don't get me wrong. I have personal experience. I know that relationships break down. I know that shit gets hard. But
tell me, I know you used to be in a violent marriage. Just tell us briefly something about that.
Yeah, I was in a relationship for 15 and a half years, and I was married to my now ex-husband. And due to a lot of issues, including mental health issues, the relationship broke down. I probably could tear up a little bit about it, but I got to the point where I was scared to go to sleep at night. I genuinely thought he was going to stab me in my sleep. Things got really, really bad, and he smashed a heap of property, and it got to the point where I had to let my colleagues know about what was happening. And an order was applied for and taken out. And I left my home.
Lisa, I gather he had mental health problems.
He did.
Which explain some of his behaviour. But so you ended, and that marriage ended, and you are obviously very concerned about women in violent relationships having the protection they need, which of course is the essence of where these laws started, isn't it?
Well, yes, but I'd like to change a bit about what you said.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about women in relationships that are violent. I'm concerned about people in relationships that are violent. People are, and that is the biggest issue that I have with the way that things are these days, is that it's so gender biased. There's the investigation process is almost being taken away from us. It's not the person that needs protection, it's the person that we're going to look better for protecting.
Yeah. So if you go into a home and say the woman has rung up and said that there's violence in the home, you go in there and you conclude that maybe she's the one who's being violent. I know you've given me some. Give me an example. I know you've told me about these sorts of cases and what happened then.
Yeah, of course. I've gone to what sounded like a really, really serious domestic violence incident. We had to go code 2, so that was lights and sirens, and driving as fast but as safe as possible, of course. And I got to the job, and this woman, she was hysterical and upset, and absolutely, of course she would be. Talking to her, got a version. All seemed to come together with her. And then I went outside and I tried to speak with the male, her partner in the situation. And he was all scratched up. He was scratched up, and without sounding super derogatory, he looked like a beaten dog. And I tried to get a version from him, and he was like, whatever. He didn't want... Not that he didn't want to talk to me, but he didn't want to tell me about what had happened. And I've tried to discuss this with him. I've tried to explain. I've gone back and I've got further versions from the female involved. And then I've come back to him and I'm like, mate, look, this is how the process is going to go. If you don't talk to me, this is all I have to go off. This is what I have. And he took a little bit and he let that sink in. And then it was like verbal diarrhea. He just came out with everything. This is what's happened. She's been at me. She was at me all afternoon. It got to the point where she was scratching him and digging into him and causing him injuries. And where it came to a head was he's pushed her and said, it was something like, get away from me, bitch. Oh, great, of course. But if somebody's scratching and assaulting and hurting me, I'm probably going to use more colourful language. But he just pushed her away, called her a bitch, and so she called police.
And what happened then?
So what happened is, from the investigation that I conducted, because in my opinion I conducted a holistic investigation, I determined that he was the person that was in need of protection. He was the person that needed to have a domestic violence order taken out to protect him. So I took her into custody. And the look of shock and horror on her face, and she literally said to me, but I called you like that would make a difference. She was the person who had caused harm and violence and fear and threats to this man who was just trying to live, trying to do his thing.
Yeah, yeah. What happened? I mean, and could you make that stick? I mean, how did that? I gather you're in a station where you get a lot of support, but I know that's not true of a lot of other police. But tell me how that all played out.
Yeah. So, I mean, by that time, I'd probably been about 10 years into the job, and I like to, really go hard for the people that I'm trying to protect, whether it's domestic violence or otherwise. But when it comes to having to make an application where the male is the person in need of protection, so what we call the aggrieved, when the male is that person, I have to really put my thinking cap on. I have to put it in, and I have to sit there and go, you know what, Lisa, you need to make sure that you articulate this perfectly, you justify this perfectly, you explain everything, you don't miss anything. It's extra work to make sure that, I'm doing the best that I can to make sure that the person who needs protection gets protected. And when that person is a man, you've got to put in that much more effort.
But I gather there are plenty of police I've talked to police over the years who've tried to do this for a male, and they meet a very hostile reception in their, from their colleagues, from their superiors. Well, maybe Paul would like to say something about that.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt about it that if you're in the position of believing that a male is in need of protection, you are up against the system big time, because they will immediately turn it around and say, well, surely the woman needs protecting. And it amazed me recently. We went to a training course where they gave an example of a woman is a baseball bat and she's smashing up the windscreen of this car. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to tell us that, no, we shouldn't be looking at the woman as the perpetrator of domestic violence. It was the man. He must have done something to drive her to that point. And based on my experience, my best guess would be, if that occurred, there is every possibility that the male was experiencing domestic violence and he was just trying to get away from it. And she was doing everything to stop him from leaving. But the point is, we don't know that until we investigate it. Why are we being trained to immediately assume that even though the female is committing domestic violence, it must be the male who's causing it? So that sort of sets the scene how difficult it is sometimes to try to get across that we should go into this with a neutral mind. It's not about intersectional politics. It's not a gender war. We need to go into it with a fair and open mind, but I don't know that our service is doing that, and I fear for that.
They're teaching us. They're teaching us a bias and then trying to cover themselves by saying that we do a holistic investigation, but we only do a holistic investigation when it benefits one particular gender. And I'm sorry, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think you said to me that, as you pointed out just now, that if you come across someone where it appears that the man is it may be the victim, your holistic investigation is supposed to find out what on earth has driven her to beating him up. I mean, right. And it only works one way.
Another way.
Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's not a good investigation, whether it's DV, whether it's assault, whether it's murder, whether it's damage to property, any of those things. You can't have a bias. You're not meant to have a bias. You're meant to go where the investigation takes you. And with the DV training that we're getting, it's taking us in completely the opposite direction.
And I gather it's getting worse. I mean, the courses you do now, 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been quite as blatant that only women are allowed to be the victim. There's been a real push across Australia in all our police services and justice systems to really ensure that males are always the ones who are treated as dangerous and potential perpetrators.
So I said it better myself.
Yeah, and I want to tell a silly little story, but it illustrates how it's infiltrated through the organisation.
Yep.
So I was at a training course recently which had absolutely nothing to do with domestic violence, and it was announced that we would be doing another 3 days of domestic violence training, and immediately out the back, a male officer called out, "It's the man!" And everybody went into hysterics because they knew and understood this was another training course to force us to conclude that it must be the man, and to go into the investigation with that thinking, it must be the man.
Yep. And if it's not the man, we haven't investigated enough to find out how it was the man.
Yeah.
I think, Lisa, you said something, made a joke about the traffic accident. Do you remember that?
Yes. We always find now, you go to any kind of job, and because we're so under pressure with DV-related jobs, or domestic violence-related jobs, that you finally get a traffic crash, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic. Lack of a better way of putting it, a little bit of black humour. And we go, yes, something different from DV. And you go to this job, and it's almost like, well, if you don't find the domestic violence in it, you haven't looked into it enough. There's got to be domestic violence there.
Yeah, I mean, they're utterly, you're finding that they're utterly obsessed by domestic violence. I mean, this has become
absolutely
centre stage of our entire justice system. And they're constantly passing more and more laws to incentivise women to make false allegations. And, of course, the thing about the false allegations is you're never allowed to mention them, are you? I mean, the idea that women make false allegations is a total no-no. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I would say at least definitely in part. It's similar when I liken it or have the analogy where people make complaints against police and it's found to be untrue, that we don't get an unsubstantiated result, we get a found to be untrue. So it's not that,
it's not that we're innocent, it's that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that we did it.
Yeah. So whilst there's false allegations from women towards men in relation to DV, well, you can't prove that she was lying, can you? And she's such a victim, you can't question that. You can't raise that.
I want to give an example of a case that I wasn't directly involved in, but I'm aware that it happened. So a woman phoned up police and said, "I'm a victim of domestic violence. My ex-partner has turned up to my house. He's assaulted me and damaged my property, and he ran off, and I'm frightened he's going to come back." So police attended the job. They saw there was a smashed coffee table and she had a bruise on her head. So they took her version and they tried to contact the male but couldn't get him on the phone. So then the result was, well, they made an application for a domestic violence order. Well, the police service got egg on its face big time when it came up in the court case that the male was actually a truck driver and in Melbourne that day, and it wasn't possible that he committed that act. But nonetheless, we're going to jump straight in and say it must be the male and we're taking out a domestic violence order against him. Now, I have to say that is a rare case where at least he could present the evidence and they listened to it and he had the case thrown out.
But when Paul, just on that, when the case is thrown out, but there are no consequences for lying, are there?
No.
Absolutely no consequences whatsoever. And the question of would we ever prosecute the woman for making a false complaint? And the answer is a resounding, there is no way we would ever do that.
But then in my little investigatory mind, I go, those false allegations with something in respect to that example that Paul provided is not her false allegations an actual act of domestic violence to use police as a weapon for her own purposes?
Yeah.
So why should we be doing that?
Well, we've got a group of lawyers at the moment considering what action we can take legally about the widespread use of false allegations. It'll be interesting to see where this ends up. But essentially, as you say, the system at the moment is nothing happens. Women can lie and lie, and it's not just lying. They can use really trivial examples. They can talk about shouting, and that's enough. That's enough to destroy a man's life. And that's the other thing they've done is absolutely expanded the question of how we see domestic violence to include all this other rubbish. Now, we need to talk a little bit about coercive control, which, of course, is the latest cab off the rank. And that, of course, has been introduced in New South Wales and is coming in Queensland. I know you're already applying the rules about coercive control. And that's a really scary... Lawyers say to me they're waiting for the tsunami to hit when this really kicks in these various states, because no one can even define what this stuff is, let alone you poor guys having to work out how to prove it. Tell me about coercive control.
Well, I would say that maybe, I don't want to exaggerate, probably once a month I will have a conversation with a person who is very often a woman, and she's been speaking to her solicitor or to a social worker and says, I would like a DV, I'm a victim of coercion and control.
Yep.
But when you try to ask her, well, what do you mean by that? She can't explain it. And somehow I'm left to try to interpret that and explain what that is. And very often the sad thing is that it's a case of the relationship has gone bad, there's a custody dispute going on, I need to get the WAP, another domestic violence order, to silence my partner. So I'm now going to retrospectively go over the last 10 years of our relationship and look for anything and everything that I can try to turn and say, that's coercion and control.
Yep.
Now, psychologists struggle to determine what's coercion and control. I haven't done 13 years at a university. How am I supposed to determine that?
I mean, you can. Psychologists don't know because it's only just been made up. You know, this whole thing has been concocted only in the last few decades.
Well, if I could give you a little bit of an example that's kind of left field. I've spoken to my parents who are both in their late 70s, and Dad has control of all the finances. So he has control of all the bank accounts, he has control of all paying the bills, all of that kind of stuff. And at this point, Mum's okay with that. She's fine because she doesn't really have an interest on sitting down with internet banking and going through all of the processes and passwords. If for some reason their marriage was to break down now, which hopefully, touch wood, it doesn't after 50 plus years, but if for some reason that broke down and she turned around and said, oh, after all these years, he's been coercively controlling me, making me think that he needs to take care of the finances.
Yep. Would that be enough?
My poor dad. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will eat my hat if that wasn't enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's just terrifying. And
that is scary and disgusting.
Yeah.
For anybody who actually loves a male in their life, I'd be terrified.
Yeah. Now, I just want to go back a bit because I was saying that with domestic violence generally, what the way to get a man sent to prison requires breaching, and we need to talk a little bit about breaches because that's, to me, another very scary area because, a woman can make a false allegation and he'll be given, she'll get a violence order to protect herself. But then what she has to do is get him to breach it in order to get him sent to jail. Tell me about how that works.
Do you mean how it works correctly or incorrectly?
Well, tell me about what you see happening around this, and how do women set men up, and
Okay, I want to give you an example of one that was it really shocked me.
Yeah.
So this couple were together. They had 2 children. They separated, went their separate ways. She moved some substantial distance away, probably 200 kilometres away, and a domestic violence order got made between them. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying for one moment that he was completely innocent and clean, but he hadn't done anything really violent. Anyway, an order got made that he was not to contact her, her mother, but he could contact her if it was in relation to contact with the children.
Yeah.
So he's allowed to phone the mother and say, hey, when can I pick up the kids?
Yeah.
So he tried to phone her, and her mobile phone was almost flat. And she said, hey, I'm sorry, my phone's really almost flat at the moment. I'm at my mum's place. Could you please phone my mum's phone number and I'll take the call and we'll talk about it. Sorry, I've got to go. So he phoned the mother's phone number and spoke to the ex-wife and made an arrangement to pick up the children. And he thought it was all okay until the mother made a complaint that I got my phone bill and I saw that he has phoned my house and he's not allowed to contact me. And he was in the firing line for breaching the domestic violence order because he had contacted the mother-in-law.
Yeah. I mean, what...
And by all rights...
Yeah, sorry, Lisa, you go on.
I was going to say, by all rights, in the black and white, I don't know what the outcome was, but he should be charged. In the black and white of the legislation, he should be charged.
Well, he was charged.
There you go. And in fairness, how do you justify that?
Yeah. But it's so easy. I mean, a woman could go to where she knows the man is going to be, and then he's in breach if he, because he's got too near to her. And you could get the kids to ring up on his birthday, and if the kids are on the order and he picks up the phone, he could be in breach. I mean, what really drives me utterly crazy is when people talk in general in our media and so on about domestic violence is getting worse and so on. They always talk about increasing the number of breaches, and we know. I mean, this is something that is absolutely being deliberately manipulated as part of the whole, lawyers teaching women how to game the system.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it would drive... I don't think people would believe the amount of times that, for us, the regular one is an order is put in place, he's not allowed to attend her address or go within a certain distance of her address, but she will invite him around. Yep. And that'll be fine, everything will be wonderful, they'll have a few drinks on a Friday night. Something then turns bad, or she's not happy because he won't give her some money, or for whatever reason, then she goes, no, fuck you, calls police.
Yeah. I mean, Lisa, I want to ask you something. I just lie awake nights thinking, what the hell? I mean, what has happened to women in this country that they can be so vicious and nasty? Do you want to know about that?
I'd like to know the answer.
Yeah.
I would like to know the answer to that. And I'm frankly, I'm disgusted and offended. Like, my mom and my grandma, as I'm sure you have family members that have fought so hard for equal rights for women.
Yeah.
And now we're just making a massive mockery of it, and we're allowing that pendulum to swing. We're becoming no better than the apparent awful men that are doing this to us.
Yeah.
Well, we're becoming worse. We're becoming vindictive and spiteful, and we're not doing it for any good cause, but to be in the right.
It's a politically driven thing by identity politics.
Mm. I mean, I think some of it is coming from the lawyers, and I'm very conscious of the fact there are women who wouldn't behave like this if it wasn't for the fact that their lawyers are saying, well, this is what you should do and you need to protect your children and you'll do better. You know, you can look after your children properly if you get more money or whatever. You know, they get sold a line that this is acceptable behaviour. But we're teaching that in our society. It's very, very scary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've had women come to the police station saying, my solicitor has told me that this is domestic violence and I should get a domestic violence order. It'll help my case for the custody fight.
Jesus.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we're looking at is, can we take action against lawyers who make this sort of recommendation? And that'll be an interesting exercise. Anyway, I have lots of plans, as you can see.
I like that.
I came out of our conference a few months ago thinking, we must do something. And I've got together all sorts of groups of people who are working on what can we do, you know. So it's going to be very interesting how that all pans out. Tell me about how your situation, how common are you guys? I mean, you are in a system which you see as unjust and you are doing your best to protect men and women and to do the right thing and provide proper justice for both sides. Are you common? What do most police think? What do your bosses think? How have we got this system working as it is, you know, when the police have to do all the hard yakka? And presumably quite a few of them hate it.
Absolutely.
Look, I think there's a big picture issue of there is a cultural war going on in this country, and it is a gender war. And this intersectional politics is a huge pressure on anyone in authority or government. And the challenge is for the police service to resist that and say, no, our purpose is to uphold the rule of law, not get hijacked by any political cause or issue. And that's the challenge that the leadership face in what are they going to do about that.
Do they really face that challenge?
On our level, look, I think the danger is that you get young, inexperienced police officers who have very limited experience of life. They haven't been through a marriage and a divorce and a breakup and whatever. And they're suddenly pushed into the situation and they have to be the referee in these situations where a relationship has degenerated, and they're looking for guidance. And the service says, well, it's always the woman that's the victim, so that's the way you have to go. I think that's the danger.
Yeah,
it's almost like an indoctrination in the training. So, I have my own beefs with management. But I think that they do push a political agenda more than a community safety, this is what's right for our public agenda. They're far more concerned about whether or not they're going to have their contracts renewed, and I'm talking other management, and how they look, and if they seem fine in the media. They're far more concerned about that than turning around and saying, if you'll excuse me, saying, no, fuck you. I don't care about your political agenda. What matters to us, because we are a police service and our job is to keep our community safe. And we will do that no matter how it looks to politics, media, etc.
Yeah.
We're not there to be the good guy. We're not there to be the person that's cuddled and loved and given 1 million likes on social media. I'm more often than not really disliked by the people that I deal with. But I also think that I deal with them fairly and justly, and that's what's missing from our processes.
If you look at your bosses, the management, I mean, look at the pressure they're under. The way the media is manipulating this issue, any police, one of your superiors who's caught out with a lot of people in his service looking after men properly, whatever it is. I know police officers who've been suspended for speaking out at inquiries and so on. I mean, there is genuine fear in terms of them people maintaining their careers, and I suppose that fear gets stronger the higher up you go, because we live in a system now where, they are out to take people out who stand up to them. They won't. Absolutely. They won't allow any challenge to what's going on because they've sewn it all up and they have all the media on their side. And you two are really brave to not only do the. Oh, sorry, Lisa. I was going to say to not only do your job fairly, which is bucking the system for a start, but to come and tell us about it.
And I do appreciate that. And I suppose that makes me really angry because I look at it and I go, I'm just this lowly little frontline copper. What do I know? What standing do I have? But you know what? I came here to do my job. And that's how I think that management should be. Yeah. They're there to do a job. They're not there to win a, public popularity quest. Yeah. Not at all. They're there to do a job, and they're there to do a job that, and quite frankly, yes, absolutely, it would be terribly hard. But if nobody stands up to these injustices, nothing is going to change, and it's never going to be right.
No, you're right. And sorry, Lisa, what I was going to say,
I need to sleep at night.
I hope you can sleep at night because you're obviously doing your very best to treat people fairly. And you're in a position to also judge the question of whether real victims aren't getting the help they need because of the farcical system we're dealing with now.
Unfortunately, and I'm sure Paul will have something else to say about this as well, but I'm disgusted by it. I think the way that we are called into action with so many things. It's like a boy that cries wolf scenario. We get so desensitized to as police, we get so desensitized to all of the allegations and the investigations and all of this kind of stuff that we often miss a real victim. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that, varying degrees of people going through these things aren't victims, but people that need intervention by police or by the courts, we miss that. There's too much. We're constantly going to these things. And unfortunately, particularly with maybe I'll say lesser experienced because it's the more polite word to use. Lesser experienced police will go, I have to, I've got this job. I have to quickly get this done. I have to go to the next one, have to go to the next one, have to go to the next one. Whereas instead of going, okay, what's actually going on here? Mm-hmm. And doing the holistic investigation, which is what we should have been doing from the get-go, not just with this new woke narrative that they have. And we can then establish a real victim.
Yeah. But sorry, I just want to let Paul come in there. What any thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, certainly. I can think of examples of a woman phoning up the station numerous times, very, very upset because her daughter had been violently assaulted by somebody. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that to her, but the reason that case hasn't been given priority is because police are tied up doing domestic violence incidents. Now, I have no problem, and in fact, I like dealing with domestic violence incidents when it's a serious incident. Something has happened and somebody needs protection. Yeah. But I don't enjoy the situation where I have somebody come to the station saying, my solicitor said, or my social worker said, I'm a victim of domestic violence and I need a domestic violence order. Now, that immediately will tie me up for a minimum of 3 hours, and it could be a day or two. While I'm doing that, I cannot deal with other cases where there are real victims of violent offences and crimes. I don't have the time or the opportunity to deal with people who are suffering far more dire consequences and have been victims of far more serious crime, because the priority is given number one to domestic violence. Now, Now, if it's genuine domestic violence, I have no problem with that. But I'm really annoyed when I'm being used as a tool to carry out a personal vendetta and make sure that I get a custody fight tool. And it frustrates me. It absolutely annoys and frustrates me.
And if I could add to that, I suppose the real kicker on it is, or the icing on the cake, is that it's not urgent. We're an emergency service as police. That's what we're there for. This is not emergent.
Yeah, no, well, you're right. And I think it is, what is really shocking is the misuse of our police force. And the fact that you guys are required to, as I've said, impose unjust laws, and that puts you in an invidious position. And I can understand your absolute frustration in wanting to speak out about that. I have to thank you. I think we better. I think we could keep talking about this all night, but it's just been wonderful having you here. I'm sure a lot of people will be absolutely thrilled to have this report from the coalface. It's a very alarming report, but it's essential that we know more about what's going on and hear it from the people who really understand just how our system is being screwed. Thank you very much for joining us, and we may one day have to have you back again for a second conversation. Good luck with your very difficult jobs.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you.